I hope your day is going well. It's again another wonderful day where we get to learn how to create relationships between tables and perform data analysis. In our last video, we learned VLOOKUP, but mostly we focused on the XLOOKUP formula. For this video, we will learn how to connect tables using the relationship feature instead of the VLOOKUP and the XLOOKUP formulas that we saw in our last video. Relationship is the connection between two tables, and one column in each table is the basis of the connection or the relationship. Once we create the relationship exists within the data model. The worksheet changes to data model, and Excel automatically does this for us behind the scenes. It stores the table and the relationships in the data model. As you can see on our screenshot right here, I have a screenshot that I took, and we'll see this when we get to create the relationship. The table that we have here, it says worksheet table, and right here also says worksheet table. And you can see the column that is the basis of this relationship is the same right here. We have the country field for both tables. But once we create a relationship, the data is now stored in the data model. And as I've said, the relationship exists within the data model. So Excel automatically does it behind the scenes, and it stores the relationship and the table in the data model. And now you can see on the screenshot here, the table is in the data model. This is a screenshot of the data model. It's a one-to-many relationship. And you can see this table here, that is the city table. It has the country field that is connected to the continent table, which has the country field as well. In our case here, the continent table is the related table, and it has a unique list for the country. But on the city table, we have duplicates for the country field, and that's why it's one-to-many relationship. We did the XLOOKUP in our last video. So let me briefly go back to what we covered on our last video. We learned XLOOKUP function in our last video. We used the XLOOKUP to look up the product code. As you can see, I have put our formula in edit mode. We used the product code to find the exact match of the product code, and it is the first column here in our lookup table. And then we returned the product back to our product column right here on this table. We did the same thing with the sales rep. Put that in edit mode. We did the same thing with the sales rep. We looked up the sales rep alpha code, and we matched that with the sales rep alpha code right here, which is the first column in this lookup table. And we returned the sales rep name in this cell here, which is the sales rep column in our table. Our formula here is calculating 73,177 formulas. Now I only have two columns that I am calculating in this table. And you can imagine if I have many columns or many tables and many pivot tables in this workbook, it will slow things down when I'm doing that kind of calculation. It will also give me huge data in this workbook. Now, relationships will help you to have less data in your workbook, and it will help you to do the calculations a bit faster. And remember that our table and relationships, they are all stored behind the scenes in the data model, and that's why it gives us less data and also does our calculations a bit faster. The first column in our lookup table, as you can see, we have two lookups table. So the first column in our lookup table, it has to have only one of each value. So for the product code, it's only one of each. It's a unique list. Same thing with the sales rep alpha code. It's only one of each of these values. It's a unique list. With the main table right here, which is our main table, the sales rep, if we look at the sales rep right here, we have duplicates. So if it's MA3321, we have another one right here. We have another one right here. We have another one right here. So we have duplicates in this table. When we come to the product code, same thing. We have the same product code right there. We have the same one there, same one there. And if I scroll down, we have another one here. But on this lookup table, we only have one of each of these items, which means we do have a relationship between the sales rep alpha code here and the sales rep alpha code on the lookup table. We also have a relationship between the product code right here and the product code in the lookup table. Now, if I scroll up, I do have a diagram here. So right here, it's one field, one too many. So all the way to the sales rep, this is many because we have duplicates here, but we only have a unique list here. Same thing with the product code. We only have a unique list here, which is the primary field, one to many relationship. We have many product codes here that are the same. We have duplicates here. So this is one to many relationship. Now with the VLOOKUPs and XLOOKUPs, we can do the approximate match and we can do the exact match as well. With the relationships, we can only do the exact lookup. When we get to access, we will also see the relationships, the one-to-many relationships between the tables. But with access, the many part of the relationship, the symbol is the infinity symbol. But then in Excel, it's the asterisk. But it's the same thing, one-to-many, which is one-to-many relationship. So the foreign field is the one that has the duplicates, and the primary field is the one that has a unique list. We used this same data to do our XLOOKUP formulas. We will use the same data, same tables, but we'll not have these two columns. We'll not have these two. So we'll use this data and these two lookup tables to create relationships. Now let's go to our start file and we create the relationships for these three tables. So here is our start file. If you're following along and working along with me, you can download the start file and let's go to the population worksheets. Now, if you can recall, when we were doing the XLOOKUP, we used this same data. We used the country column, which has the many countries right here, and the unique list of the country list here. And we created an extra column here where we looked up the country and matched up with the exact country here, and we brought back into this table the continent. What we will do now, we're not doing the XLOOKUP by creating the extra column right here, but we are creating a relationship between these two tables. And then once we create a relationship, we will create a pivot table that has the continent and the total population, just like we did in our last video. So the first thing that we need to do here, I have written the steps that we're doing right here. The first thing that we're doing before we create the relationship is convert these two tables to Excel tables. So as you can recall, we already learned how to convert our data set to an Excel table. You click on any one cell in your data set, and then you use the keyboard shortcut, Control-T. And if you don't want to use the keyboard shortcut, the other way that you can do is to go to the Insert tab on your ribbon, and then on the Tables group, you click on the table. So instead of going that route, I like using the keyboard shortcut. So what we will do is make sure that we click on any one cell, and then now I will use the keyboard shortcut instead of going to the Insert tab and clicking on the table. You can see the keyboard shortcut right there is Control-T. I will do Control-T, and I can see my data set is all selected. I can see the dancing ants right there. Make sure that this box is checked. My table has headers. I will click OK. And again, the first thing that I said even in our last videos, make sure the first thing that you do is to name your table. On our instructions here, we are naming the table city. So I'll come up here and I'll name this city and enter. And then the next thing is to convert this other table to an Excel table as well. So Control-T, and make sure that we check this box. My table has headers. Click OK. Again, the first thing is to name this table. We're naming this table continent. That's our lookup table. And enter. So our next step is to create a relationship to connect both tables, the city table and the continent table. So to create a relationship, on your ribbon, you will go to the Data tab, and then on your Data tab, you will go to the Data Tools group, and then you will see the Data Model button right there. It's green right there. So click on that arrow, and then you will select relationships. So I will click on that, and now we have a manage relationship dialog box open right there. We can see we don't have any relationships yet in this workbook. If we had any relationships, it will show here. So we are creating a new relationship. So we'll click on new. And now we can see we get our create relationship dialog box. So we pick the tables that we want to use in our relationship and the columns that we are using in our relationship. As I said, the table that has the foreign column is the table that has duplicates for the fields. And then the related table is the lookup table, which has a unique list in your related column. So our table here will be the city table. It's the one that has many countries in the country field. And you can see right here, it says worksheet table city. We named it as city. I will select that. And then the column that we are using to connect both tables or to create a relationship for both tables is the country field. So click on that arrow and select the country field. And this one has many items of the same country. Now let's go to the related table. This is the lookup table. We click on that arrow. We named that continent, and you can see it's worksheet table continent. And now the field, it has to be the same because we are creating a relationship. So I will click on that arrow and I will select country. And you can see these two columns are the same. We are creating a relationship, which is a connection between these two tables, and one column, which is the country column in both tables, which is the basis of our relationship. Now, once I click OK, I will click OK and close it, and then come back and open this create relationship dialog box. And you will see that our data will not be in the worksheet table anymore, but it will have changed to data model. So let's click OK. And it's taking some time because it's storing our data behind the scenes. And now we can see we have the relationship here. We have the city, we have the country field, we have the continent, and we are connecting that with the country field as well. Now, if we open this relationship again, because I want to show you that now our data is not in the worksheet anymore, Excel has created a relationship for us behind the scenes and stored this data and the relationship in the data model. Now I'm gonna click edit right there, and you can see now our tables right here, they are in the data model table. This is the tables that we used, city and continent, and you can see the columns that we are using, but now they are in the data model. Now we'll click OK and close right here. And now before we create a pivot table, I will go and show you the data model. So I'm still in the data tab, data tools group, and I will click on the data model button right there. Click on that arrow and then click the manage data model to open the data model, and it opens in a new window. So we can see our data right there. So this is the data view. This is the city table, and you can see it has the same fields, same data as we have in our worksheet right there. Click on the continent. Same thing, it has the same fields as we have in our, trying to move this so you can see. So let me just minimize that so you can see it's the same. Right there. So you can see we have the country and we have the continent, which is the same fields that we have in our worksheet right there. But then this data now is stored in the data model, and I will show you the relationships as well. So this is the data view. I'm gonna minimize this a little bit so that I am not using the whole window. So now we have the data view. If we click on the diagram view so we can see the relationships, now you can see the relationship between these two tables. We have one too many. Now I'm gonna move this a little bit up here and move this right there. So you can see we have one too many, and if I hover on this line, you can see the fields that are highlighted, which is the column country in our continent table and the same column country in our city table. So those columns that are in each table, those are the basis of our connection for this relationship. If you are creating a relationship, you need to make sure that you're using one column that will connect both tables, which will help you create a relationship for both tables. So I cannot connect country and continent because I don't have a continent field in this table. I can also not connect the country here and the population because I don't have a population field in this table. So I have the country field in the continent table, and I have a country field in the city table, and that's why I can create a relationship and connect these two columns so that my relationship works. And now I will close this window, which is the data model window. I will close that. And now what we need to do is to create a pivot table. So we created a relationship with the country column. That's what we used for our relationship. Now the next step here is to create a pivot table in this same worksheet that shows population by continent. So because our data right now is stored in the data model, when I'm creating or inserting the pivot table, I don't have to select on any of these two tables, because if I select on any of these tables, then I'm creating a pivot table just for that table that I am selecting. But we're creating a pivot table for these two tables. That means I'm selecting outside in any one cell, not in any cell in these two tables. And because our data is coming from the data model, if I go to the Insert tab and then select the pivot table, you can see now the data model here is not grayed out. We have an option now to select data from data model. So if you were to insert a pivot table with our data that is in the data model, because we already have a relationship, you will select pivot table and then your data is now coming from the data model. So for me, because I love using the keyboard shortcut for that is Alt and VD. So I'll click on that one cell and I'll use my keyboard shortcut Alt and VD because my data is coming from the data model. Now we have the pivot table from data model. Choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. I'm placing the pivot table in this same worksheet and in this same cell that I have selected here, and I will click OK. Now let's create a pivot table. I will expand this so you can see the tables that we have right here in our pivot table fields pane. So you can see we have two tables right here. And if you see it's shaded up here and this one is shaded as well up here, that means these two tables are stored in the data model. So if you expand that, you can see all the fields that are in this table. And if you expand this as well, you can see the fields that are in this table. We're creating a pivot table for continent and total population. We're dragging the continent field to the rows area. I just clicked on it, it goes to the rows area. And then we want the population in the values area because that's what we are calculating. Now you can see we have our pivot table right there. I didn't select on any of the tables. I just selected on any cell outside of those two Excel tables, and I inserted our pivot table from the data model. We have our pivot table right here. The next thing that we need to do is name the pivot table, add number formatting, and show in tabular form. I'm already showing my pivot table in tabular form. If yours is not showing in tabular form, you would go to design, and then on the report layout, this is on the layout group, you click on that arrow and you will select show in tabular form, and then that will change from row labels if you had row labels showing there, and it will change to continent. Now the next thing that we need to do is to name our pivot table. So I'm going back to the ribbon on the pivot table analyze tab, and we are naming our pivot table continent population. We have our pivot table named. The next thing that we are supposed to do here is to add number formatting. Right click on that on my values and select number format. And I'm doing number. I'm not doing any decimals, so 0 decimals. And I'm checking that box for use thousand separator for the comma. And then I will click OK. And now I have done the number formatting. I've named my pivot table. It's showing in tabular form. I've done all the steps that I'm supposed to do that I have listed right there. So that's the way you will insert a pivot table from a data model, and also how you would create relationships. Now let's go to the sales data worksheet. This is our second example where we are creating a relationship between these three tables. Now we used these three tables in our last video when we did XLOOKUP. We added an extra column here, which was a helper column. But on this video, we are creating relationships. We will use the relationship feature. We'll create a relationship between these three tables. And then we will insert a pivot table to analyze our data. I have listed the steps that we will follow on this worksheet right there. So step 1 is to convert each table to an Excel table and name the tables to reflect the data that is in the table. I'm selecting any one cell in this main table right there. Control T to convert these to an Excel table, and I will click OK, but make sure that my table has headers boxes checked, and then I'll click OK. And then the first thing that we need to do is to name our table. We are naming this table sales data. We'll do the same thing with this second table, which is our product lookup table. Control T, making sure my table has headers boxes checked, and click OK, and we are naming this table product lookup table. We're doing the same thing with the third table, which is the sales rep lookup table. Control T, make sure my table has headers box is checked, click OK, and name the table. Now we have these three tables, and we would like to create a relationship between the three tables. Before I do that, I would like to show you how many records we have on this table. So I'll do Control down arrow, and we can see we have I'm in the row 73,194, so it's about 73,170 records that we have here. Control up arrow. Now let's create a relationship for these tables, which is our step 2 right there. Using the relationships button in the data tools group in the data ribbon tab, create a relationship between the sales table and the two lookup tables. I'm going to the data tab on my ribbon. On the data tools group, click on the data model arrow right there, and click on the relationships button right there to open the manage relationships dialog box. We already have a relationship in this workbook that we created with our population worksheet between the city and the continent tables. Now we need to create another relationship as well. So we will click on new. We're creating a new relationship. Our main table here, which has the foreign column, is the sales table because it doesn't have any unique list for the product code and the sales rep alpha code. We have duplicates in these fields. So this is our main table. I will click on that arrow, and as you can see, we have the data model table, which is the one that we converted is the city, and the continent table as well. But these three other tables that we just converted to an Excel table, they are still showing here as worksheet table. Once we create a relationship, this will change to data model as well. So we're using the sales data, and we are connecting the sales data with the product lookup table. We're using the product code for that because we are connecting the product code and the product code. This is the unique list here on our lookup table, and this is the many code for the product code, which is duplicates, and this is one-to-many relationship. I will click on that arrow and I will select product code. Now my related table will be the product lookup table. Click right there and I will select product lookup table. And these two columns have to be the same, so it's the product code for both tables. These two columns are the basis of our relationship. And I will click OK. And you can see it's creating our relationship behind the scenes. And now we have a second relationship there. Now let's create a new relationship. We're creating a relationship between our main table right here and the sales lookup table right there. I'll drag this up here to the side. Our main table right there is the sales data table. And you can see right now it doesn't say worksheet, but it says data model because it has already been stored in the data model because we created a relationship between the sales data table and the product lookup table. I will click on that. We are connecting the sales rep alpha code with the sales rep alpha code on our sales rep lookup table. The sales rep alpha code on the sales rep lookup table, that's our unique list. So that's one. And on the sales data table, that's the many. So one to many. I will select the foreign column as the sales rep alpha code. And on the related table, this is the one that has the unique list, which is our lookup table. And it is the sales rep lookup table. And you can see this one is still in the worksheet because we have not yet created a relationship between these two tables. Our related column, it has to be the same. So we're selecting on that arrow and selecting sales rep alpha code. So these two columns have to be the same. These are the basis of our relationship. And I will click OK. And now you can see we have all the relationships that we have created in this workbook showing right there. We'll close that. And now we can create our pivot tables. So let's go to the that step right there. It says on a new sheet, create a pivot table. We are inserting a pivot table from the data model. And there's a hint here. Select on the cell where you would like to place your pivot table in the new worksheet and insert a pivot table from the data model. The keyboard shortcut, I have listed it there, Alt N VD. We will create a new worksheet. I will use the plus symbol right there to insert a new worksheet. And once we have the new worksheet, I always like to name it first. Instead of leaving it as sheet 1, make sure you name your worksheet. I will double click on that and I'm naming this sales data PV for pivot table and enter. Now I will select on cell B3. That's where I would like to insert my pivot table. And if you're not using the keyboard shortcut, you will go to Insert, Pivot Table, and your data is coming from the data model. So you will select the data model to open the Pivot Table from data model dialog box. I will close that. I will use the keyboard shortcut, Alt and V D, and I open that again. Choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. I already chose cell B3, and I will click OK. As you can see, all these tables showing here are in this workbook. These two tables, we already created a relationship between these two, and you can see they are all shaded, which means they are all stored in the data model. Now we are only using these three tables for our pivot table right here. So you can see right here, I have clicked on all and I see all the pivot tables. But if I click on active, I don't have any pivot tables there. I'll go back to the all tab right there, and I will right click on that first table there, and I will select show inactive. So this is good to know, because if you have a lot of tables that you have in your workbook, you can select the tables that you would like to use for your pivot table report, and then select show inactive tab. And I'm using this table as well. I will right click and select show inactive tab. Now if I go to the active tab, I only have the tables that I'm using for this pivot table. I will expand that and expand that. Now I can see all the tables that I'm using in the pivot table. Now before we drag the fields to the areas below here, let's go back to the sales data worksheet and read our instructions. On step 4, we want to drag the sales rep field from the sales rep lookup table to the rows area, the product field from the product lookup table to the rows area, and the sales field from the sales table to the values area, and then insert two slicers, a region slicer and a year slicer. Now let's go back to the sales data PV worksheet and let's drag the fields. We will start with the sales rep. It's the sales rep lookup table. So we get the sales rep to the rows area. And then we did the product from the product lookup table. We get the product to the rows area. And then we get the sales from the sales data table. We get that to the values area. And we can see now we have our pivot table. Now before we insert our slicers, we have our pivot table already and done. Let's go back to the sales data. We need to show our pivot table in tabular form, add number formatting, and name the pivot table. So going back to the sales data pivot table worksheet, we are already showing our pivot table in tabular form. Again, if yours is not showing in tabular form, you will go to design. On the layout group, select the report layout button, click on that arrow, select show in tabular. And if you want yours to be showing the report in tabular, the report layout in tabular by default, I showed you this before, but I will show you again in this video. You go to the file and then you select options, and then on the date option right there, you select edit default layout, and then you change report layout show in compact form, change that to show in tabular form, and click OK, and click OK. And now any other pivot table that you create going forward, it will show in tabular form. Now let's add our number formatting on this one. I will right click on any of these values and select number format. I'm doing number, no decimals, and I'm checking that box for 1,000 separator for the commas and click OK. And we need to name our pivot table. Click on the Pivot Table Analyze tab. On the Pivot Table group, this is where we will name our pivot table. And I'm naming our pivot table total sales. Now let's insert our slicers. We are doing a region slicer and a year slicer. And because I don't have a year field, I only have the date, but we know that we can use the pivot table to group our dates to years and months and quarters. What I will do, because I would like to use the grouping feature in our pivot table, I will drag the date to the rows. And now we have the date there, but it has grouped for us. So all I needed to do was to group it. So I will drag that out. I don't need those fields there. And I can also uncheck them from there and uncheck it from there. But now I have the year, which I will need to use for my slicer. That's all I needed to do. I needed to use the grouping feature, take advantage of my pivot table and use the grouping feature to get the year field right there. But my pivot table, I'm leaving it with just the sales rep, product, and the sum of sales. Now let's insert our slicer. Click on the Insert Slicer. It's in the Pivot Table Analyze tab on our ribbon. On the Filter group, click Insert Slicer. And I'm doing the year slicer first and click OK. And I'm dragging it up here and resizing it and making sure that it's filtering. Yep, it is filtering. Clear the filters. And I will right click on it so that I can rename it. Click on the slicer settings and I will change that from date to year. And same thing here as well. The caption to display is year. And click OK. So I have my year slicer right there. I need a region slicer as well. So again, I'm clicking inside my pivot table on any of the values there. Go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab on my ribbon. On my filter group, click Insert Slicer button. And this time I'm doing a region slicer and click OK. And I have my region slicer right there. And I will resize that. And I want to make sure that it's filtering. Yep, that is filtering. It is all working. So I will clear my filters and clear my filters there as well. Now we have analyzed our data right here with our pivot table and the two slices. Our data here is coming from these three different tables that we created a relationship on. We didn't select on any of these tables when we were inserting the slicer. We created a new worksheet and then we selected on any one cell in this new worksheet and we inserted our pivot table from the data model and then we inserted these two slices. We used the grouping feature to get the year field. We grouped our date using the pivot table grouping feature for the date and we got the year field. And then we created the year field for our pivot table right there. Now, before I end this video, I would like to go back and show you the data model since we added the new relationship for these three tables. We'll go to the Data tab. And on the data tools, I can see my data model button right there. I will click on that arrow and select manage data model. And now we can see all the tables that we created the relationship on. We have the sales data. This is the table that we just created the relationship on. And we can see also the date that we grouped right there. That is the product lookup table and that's the sales rep lookup table. Now let's look at the diagram view so we can see our relationships. This is the first relationship that we created. I will drag it up there to the side. And then I will drag this right there so we can see the relationship that we created on this one. And I will expand this one a little bit so I can get the other table right there. Actually, let me drag it down there so we can see it completely. Okay, and then I will expand this so we can see all that. This is the three tables that we created a relationship on. And this is the first two tables that we created a relationship on. And you can see the relationship that we created is showing right there. This is one too many, and this is one too many. And if I click on this line right there, you can see the fields that we are connecting in our relationship. It's the sales rep alpha code column on both tables. And on this other one, it's the product code on both tables. Now we see how our data is stored in the data model and how the relationships also are stored in the data model. I will close that. And the last thing that I would like to do on this video, I would like to add a color to this sheet tab right there. I will right click on it and select the tab color, and I will select the yellow color. Now that looks good. Now we have come to the end of this video, and we have learned great skills. We have learned how to use the relationship feature in Excel and create relationships for our tables. We have seen how our tables and our relationships are stored behind the scenes in the data models. And we have gone to the data models and seen the relationships and the tables as well. On this worksheet, I've included also a homework file that you can work on to give you more practice. So that is it for this video, and I will see you in our next video. Bye for now, and see you in our next video.